Welcome to the channel. Today I'm going over how to use a circular saw. Let's get to it. For the most part, damn near all circular saws, corded or battery powered, operate the same and have the same features. Let me go over the features first. Here is the handle with the trigger switch, a hand grip for the other hand, the blade guard. This moves in as you make a cut. Once in a while you'll have to hold this up to make a cut. This is the base plate. You lay this down on the material you're cutting to help keep the saw flat and straight in position safely. The height adjustment lever. This controls how much of the blade you want to use when making the cut. When you loosen the lever, the base plate can be moved up and down, so you can position the base plate to the height you want. Then tighten the lever back down to lock it in. Position the base plate all the way up to expose the max amount of blade. This position is for cutting thick material like 2x4. Lower the base plate to cut things like plywood. Here's the bevel adjustment knob. This lets you cut a bevel in the material you're cutting into. This is more of a sophisticated cut. Turn this knob to loosen it. The base plate can now be moved in the bevel position. There are markings here to let you know what degree the base plate is positioned in. Most saws usually go up to a 45-degree bevel. Once you have the desired bevel position, tighten the knob to lock it in place and make your cut. Now for the blade. You can get all kinds of blades for a circular saw. You just need to make sure you get the correct size and the correct size bore hole. It is usually 7 1/4 with a 5/8 hole. They sell blades to cut concrete, vinyl, metal, and wood. For cutting wood, the more teeth the blade has, the more of a smooth cut with less wood flaring, working on fine furniture type cuts. To change the blade, first unplug it or remove the battery. Then it's best to use the wrench or the Allen wrench that came with the saw. Sometimes the Allen wrench is attached somewhere on the saw. There's usually a button around this area you need to press and hold as you turn the blade. You will feel the button go lower and you will no longer be able to turn the blade. Keep your finger on the button. Use the wrench tool to loosen the nut in the middle of the blade. Remove the nut, washer, and blade. Note the direction of the teeth on the blade as you remove it. Install the new blade in the same direction. There should be a mark on the blade and the tool indicating the direction the blade needs to be installed. Reinstall the washer, the nut, and keep your finger on the button as you tighten it. Okay, now let's go over using this thing. The first thing to mention is wear safety glasses whenever cutting material. Once you have those on and have what you're going to cut marked out, the next thing is to make sure you have the base plate at the correct height for the thickness of the material you're cutting. Make sure there's nothing else but the material you're going to cut in the path of your blade. Believe it or not, but I have seen people cut the cord to the saw as they were making the cut. Always start your cut by having the blade away from the material you're about to cut. Have the base plate flat on the material. Squeezing the trigger to start the blade, then pass it through. The blade must be spinning before inserting it in any material. If you start it with the blade touching the material, it will kick back on you. Speaking of kickback, this is when the material you're cutting bonds up with the saw blade and makes the saw violently jerk back, which can cut you really bad. To avoid that, let's go over some basic cutting techniques. First, if you can, Keep both hands on the saw when making the cut. This will give you better control of the saw and will help prevent you getting hurt if the saw does kick back. Put the material you're cutting in a position where one side of the material will fall after the cut. Don't try to hold it up or have someone try to hold it to keep it from falling. Let it fall. I find cutting material on the ground with a 2x4 under it is the safest way to make cuts, especially if you're a beginner. This is because with the 2x4 under the material, you can use your foot or your body weight to press down on one side of the material, causing the other side to go up in the air. Your weight is what's holding the material safely, freeing up both of your hands to use the saw safely, and the material does not have far to fall, making the cut safer. Now let's talk making straight cuts. There should be some kind of marking on the saw base plate. This is there so you can use as a guide. Just keep that mark lined up with the mark that you made on the material you're cutting as you're cutting, and your cut will turn out straight. If you need to make a bevel cut, adjust the base plate to the desired degree, then use the indicator on the base plate as your guide. I suggest making 1 or 2 practice cuts to learn the saw. Once you do, you'll be making straight cuts with no problem. Speaking of straight cuts, most circular saws also come with a guide attachment. This attachment will help you make straight rip cuts of a constant size you have it set to. Obviously, there's a limit on how wide your cuts can be using the guide. To use the guide, loosen this knob here to allow the guide to go into the guide holding slot. Sometimes there are measurements on the guide to let you know how wide your cut will be set in that position. If there are no measurements, you'll have to use a measuring tape and measure from the blade to the guide to know the width of your cut. Once you have the desired measurement you want, tighten up the knob to lock the guide in place. Place the guide against the material. Have the base plate flat on the material. Start the saw away from the material, then pass it through, keeping the guide pressed up against the material. Using the guide can take some getting used to as well, but don't worry. Like the other techniques I showed you in this video, make a couple of practice cuts and you'll be a master at them. Another easy way to get straight cuts is to use another piece of wood clamped down on the wood you're cutting to use as a guide. You just have to know the distance from the blade to the end of the base plate. Let's say this is 5 inches. Then let's say you need to cut something at 40 inches. Subtract 5 from that 40, which means you'll have to position the guide wood at 35 inches. Clamp it down and make your cut. Make sure the base plate stays pressed up against the guide wood. If you have to cut a thin piece off, hold the blade guard up as you make the cut. For some reason, thin pieces can get caught up in the blade guide and keep the saw from passing through. There are more advanced techniques when it comes to using the circular saw. These are just the basic technique for you beginner folk or for people that's not going to use it as much. If you're thinking about buying a circular saw, I suggest buying a corded one. I use saws all the time. A battery powered saw just doesn't have the same power as a corded one. I mean, a battery powered one is good if you gotta make quick cuts here and there, but it doesn't have that power. And I see the battery dies a lot quicker too, especially if you're cutting harder materials too, like pressure treated 2x4. And that's pretty much it for using a circular saw. Stay tuned to the channel as I put out more content on using other basic tools and show you how to maintain the place you're living at. Use the comment section below to leave a comment, ask a question, or if you'd like for me to show you how to use another tool that you're thinking about buying. Thanks for watching. Be blessed. Hit that like, bell, and subscribe button for me. Until next time. Peace.